Inflation is a wild subject. While once considered almost universally bad, high rates of inflation have now hit America and countries with very different reactions than I'm used to coming from media outlets. It's a bit like the pandemic, actually. Some say it doesn't exist, some say it's transitory and it'll go away by itself, while most people think having a lot of it around is going to be really bad for us. We're inviting on the finance channel, Tom Nash, aka Mr. Bear Market. Let me just ask you, inflation a big deal? Should we be worried about it?
Well, let me tell you a little story. When I was 15, I had a toothache and I ignored it for like 7 years. And what ended up happening is that the tooth was in such a bad shape. I was screaming for my mom and more anesthetics. And eventually we resolved this issue. The dentist needed a treatment. But it's like neglecting your teeth. When you neglect inflation, you run the risks of experiencing immense amount of pain and long-lasting damage, which is exactly where we're at right now. Only problem is, we have a very strange situation where we went to the doctor, he told us our teeth are fine, he asked that we pay the bill for his services, we paid the bill, and now he called us to say, well, in fact, I was wrong, your teeth are completely f***ed. The minute he got our money, which is
wait, obviously, wait, hold on. Let's play fair. Obviously, you're talking about our Supreme Leader, Jerome Powell.
No. I would never. How dare you doubt him? Such a cynical person. How dare you doubt JP?
Look, this is actually why I wanted to bring this all up, is because I've been watching with some interest sort of the media cycle around this, trying to figure out what's going on, how to feel about it. And it's been interesting to watch. It feels like the 5 stages of grief, but with inflation, realizing that it is happening. At first, they said inflation will not happen. It's not going to happen. We're going to be fine. And then Jerome Powell told us it's transitory.
In the end, it will be transitory. And people need to have faith in the central bank that we will do that. But we won't do it just because, honestly, it would be a mistake to do it at a time when we really do believe, and virtually all forecasters do believe, that these things will come down of their own accord as the economy reopens.
So there you go. We just need to all have faith and everything will be fine. But then eventually he told us that, well, that's not what he meant by transitory. Things aren't coming down.
The concept of transitory is really this. It is that the increases will happen. We're not saying they will reverse. That's not what transitory means. It means that the increases in prices will happen. So there will be inflation, but that the process of inflation will stop.
So, okay, now it's just going to stop all on its own. But now he says we need to retire the term transitory altogether, even though he's the one who invented it.
How long does inflation have to run above your target before the Fed decides maybe it's not so transitory?
I think it's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean.
So, Tom, this is my conundrum. I'm trying to understand what Jerome Powell means when he's talking about inflation. It's not here. It's transitory. Wait, that's not what we meant. Wait, it's not transitory. It's here to stay. Are we facing an inflation crisis? And what's really going on here? Explain to us what's going on.
Well, Stephen, I think the problem is with you. Your cynicism does not allow you to appreciate the full scope of Jerome Powell's explanation. Let me explain to you what's going on.
Please.
And I know some of you cynical people will say, well, it's really ironic. It's like the communist saying, let's retire the word Stalin, right? It's pretty much he's the one who came up with the term and now he's retiring it. I think it's only fair. It's like my dad once told me, I brought you into this world and I will, you know the rest. Basically, Russian dad, it's okay. Different cultures. But basically, what the thing you don't understand, Stephen, is that Jerome Powell started off saying that we don't have inflation, even though we printed 40% of the US dollar ever in the past year. And then he went and explained that the problem is that we don't understand what transitory is. It's not about the transitioning of inflation up and down. It's us transitioning into the realization that we just have to believe every word he says despite the reality. Now, finally, we're coming to the final stop, which is accidentally close to his renomination. Of course, I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact he got renominated, but essentially now he got renominated, he gets to keep his job, which is good for him. And now, all of a sudden, he's basically saying, well, I made a huge mistake. Basically, everything I told you in the past 2 years, it was everything is wrong. And I think it's good.
Wait, hold on. You're not suggesting that Jerome Powell was saying it's all transitory, it's all fine while he's being renominated, and then as soon as he's being renominated, he suddenly changes his language. That's not what you're suggesting.
No. God forbid this would be the case. I think it would take a really cynical person to think something like this. Of course, the thing you need to understand, Stephen, again, as you being a cynical person, you're missing the whole point of this. Is the point here is quite simple. Jerome Powell is basically telling you right now, listen, I made a huge mistake. Everything I've ever said since the pandemic started until yesterday, which was before the hearing, was complete nonsense. And I think it takes a really a strong person to admit that he's been so wrong for so long. I think he should be awarded for this. In fact, I think we should give him the Congressional Medal of Honor for having the balls to say that he f***ed up. I'm sure it has nothing to do with his renomination. I find it really insulting that you would think that, Stephen. The thing about that really perplexes me, the thing that really perplexes me, we should keep it in.
Yeah, sure.
We can have little bubbles coming out from my mouth. The thing that really perplexes me, Stephen, is that, in fact, the data that Jerome Powell is basing his assumption on hasn't really changed. It's basically completely identical. The CPI, which is the core price index, which is the Fed's favorite metric to measure inflation, which is in itself a little bit of a cheat code because it doesn't really look at housing and the stock market, which is usually the more inflationary areas of the economy, is already at a 30-year high. The last time it was this high, I think the original Bush was the president, or even Clinton. I don't even remember. It was long ago. So the numbers hasn't changed. It's very stagflationary. Low participation in the job market, very high core price index. And all of a sudden, he sees something. I think God must have spoken to him, bro. This is the only explanation I have, because the data hasn't changed. God came down and said, Jerome, I think you were wrong. And I think he embraced this, and good for him for
having the courage to realize that he was wrong. Now, let me ask you.
I want to give you an example. It's like going to the doctors and giving him an x-ray of your chest. And the doctor is looking at you and saying, well, everything is fine. Your chest is, you're like a Spanish bull. And then he calls you 2 weeks later and said, listen, I looked at it again and you're dying. This is exactly the same thing. Not that the economy is dying, but I mean, this is the same level of mistake that was made here. And I think it's a real it's a sign of honesty. Federal officials are willing to come out and say how bad they are at their job. I think we should be commended for doing that.
So one of the things that I've been looking at is just the amount of positive coverage that's come out about inflation. There's been a lot of talk by media outlets recently that there's no need to panic because, in fact, not only are high levels of inflation maybe not even happening, but if they are happening at all, it's actually a good thing for poor people and a bad thing for Jeff Bezos. Do you think that's true, that Jeff Bezos is the one suffering and that his Amazon workers are the one who are going to be liberated by inflation? These are real headlines. I just saw something from The Intercept. I've seen some things from things like, Vox, where people are talking about, look, inflation's not that big of a deal. It's actually good for you. It's going to lower your debts. What do you think about that?
I think it's rich people are saying this to the poor people while they're getting off the Titanic, pretty much. It's very similar. And you and I are the band playing on the boat while everybody is basically saying to the poor hey, stay on the boat. Drowning is good for you.
This is a transitory sinking.
It's
we're
a transitory drowning.
Right out of it.
You'll come back better than ever. If it doesn't kill you, it make you stronger. I swear to God. Just stay here while we get on the lifeboats. It's literally what's going on here. Because listen, to be in all seriousness, this is what's going on. Inflation erodes your purchasing power. Inflation causes a single dollar to be worth less. A year ago, you could buy 10x. This time you can buy 3x. You just lost a ton of that you can't buy. Simple as that. Now, if you're a rich, 3x is still a lot of x's. But if you're a poor, then 3x is not a lot of x's. So by definition, and I've seen this with my own eyes as a kid, some of you may not know this, but I was a young kid in Russia when the Russian hyperinflation happened in the 90s. And I saw how people sell their underwear and socks on the market, this improvised market, just to get some food, and how a kilogram of apples is now basically your monthly salary, bro. It ain't pretty. You think the richest people felt the same amount of pain as the poor people? I mean, it's preposterous. It's pretty much reminds me of the story a long time ago when I came back. I was 16, 17 years old, came back from a party, very intoxicated. My dad saw me, and I immediately said, without him even asking, well, I'm not drunk. And he, of course, said nothing, but his eyes was very telling.
Yeah.
And as I walked to my room, I immediately started to lose the gravitational force, essentially skewing to the 45-degree angle all the way to basically lying flat on the ground. While I was making my way to the room, essentially making it very clear what's really going on here. When I hear mainstream media push this narrative, I'm much like my dad in 1997, or whenever that was. I pity the fool. I mean, it's simple as that. It's just a bunch of gobbledygook nonsense.
So what do you think the lifeboats are? You talked about people are getting on the Titanic, the lifeboat, whatever. What is that like? What does that analogy mean?
That analogy is very simple. There's a lot of asset classes that are very good at inflation to protect your money because they park your money at certain areas of the economy that's going to go up during inflation. I don't know if you noticed, but real estate is hella expensive right now. Why do you think that's happening? Because everybody try buy a house right now. Rather just try and list a house.
Yeah.
Everybody's buying up real estate. The problem is, it's a really good measure to counter inflation, to park your money in real estate. The problem is if you're a school teacher or bus driver, you can't really buy real estate because you're living paycheck to paycheck. And once your paycheck is realistically now worth 1/2 of what it was worth 2 years ago, you're in deep. And ain't no amount of good publicity is going to help you pay for your lunch.
No amount of articles are gonna.
Can I have this burger?
Your way
no
out
problem,
of it?
sir. No problem. You can have this burger. It will be 4.5 articles. Here you go. 1 CNN article, 3 Fox articles, and 1 CNBS article. Here you go. Here's your burger, sir. It's not gonna. Yeah. It's the only way, bro.
What do you think? I mean, obviously Biden wants to keep the party going. That's he's kind of incentivized to, and every president is incentivized to always
every
keep
government
rates low.
is,
Always keep growth at all costs. Then you have the Fed coming in and saying, wait, we need to do something different. Who do you think is going to win this little battle?
So first of all, we have to be clear about it's a completely bipartisan thing. Every government in any country does not want the Fed of its country, the central bank of its country, to actually stop the party. Right now, we have an example of what's going on when the politics wins over the economists. Of course, all of you follow the Turkish economy, I'm sure. Every single one of you is,
Nope.
Yeah, an avid viewer of what's going on. So I don't know if you heard this, but in Turkey, just about 2 weeks ago, the local currency, which is called the Turkish lira, so the Turkish lira crashed about 30%, lost a third of its value in just a few days. Why? Because basically they have a guy over there that calls the shots, and they decided, well, we're not going to raise interest. They don't have like an independent central bank that can actually do it. And the economy is collapsing, and you're going to see some really harsh results. Now, the thing is, you have to understand, despite all my criticism, either direct or indirect or cynical, in the US, we still have this independence. The only point of non-independence we had is when Biden actually appointed or renominated Jerome Powell for another term. But once that happened, it's no longer in Biden's hands. It's basically, he has the job, he can do whatever he wants, and he's actively pursuing that, to his credit. What he said in the latest hearing is 100% correct. They have to stop asset purchases as fast as possible and raise interest rates, because right now we're dealing with a junkie. The US market is a junkie in a really bad shape, and it must go through rehab if we have any chance of saving it. And trust me, going through rehab isn't going to be pretty, isn't going to be nice, it's going to be painful, but it has to be done. So to his credit, and that's not cynical, him actually, the latest testimony actually sounds what he should have said like about a year ago. Finally, we're getting this done.
Yeah, I just looked that Turkish lira thing up. It said, I'm reading, this is from Reuters. 10:05, the lira had recovered after weakening to 13.88 versus the dollar. It touched an all-time low of 14 last week after a 30% plunge over the last month. So this is what you're saying is what happens when you have too much, and just nobody's basically paying attention to how much money is being printed and pumped into the economy. You're just trying to keep the party going, but you try to do it too long.
Let me give you a simple example how I think things played out. The government wants a long-term relationship with money printing. Imagine it's Tinder, right? And the government is looking for date. And Jerome Powell is on Tinder, basically saying, well, I want a really long relationship with printing money as well. They hook up, and then after they hook up, Jerome Powell says, well, nope. And he blocks the government from his phone call. It's literally what just happened, bro. So I think it's a really good analogy of what just happened.
You're saying he kind of stiffed.
Yeah, he just ghosted Biden, bro.
He ghosted Biden.
Yeah, he ghosted Biden.
Obviously, Biden wouldn't have renominated him had he known that Powell was going to just like tighten things up.
No. I think it would be very hard for me, of course, to claim that there is a relationship between Biden and Jerome Powell. But I think, like, on a more economic level, I think that relationship would not have gone forward had Biden thought that Powell is going to pull the stunt, which he just did in front of the Congress, basically saying, well, the party's over. And he's doing it right in front of, just before Christmas, which is probably the worst time for a politician to start tapering.
Yeah, right. Because everyone wants to go out there, get their Christmas gifts, not worry about the economy. Yeah, it seems like it's really interesting to see the times we're living in with this like sort of unprecedented monetary policy. So I guess there's so much that I don't know here. I guess what should people be looking for? Just your average person out there works a 9-to-5 job. You know, he's looking at this. He's wondering what's going on. Obviously, we don't give financial advice on the show, but what are your thoughts as just someone who watches the markets?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to stay away from the stock market a little bit. If you haven't dipped your feet in the stock market, now is probably not a good time, because you have to understand that the byproduct of what the Fed is about to institute right now, which is a major policy shift, essentially, stopping the money printer, stopping basically the asset purchases, is essentially stopping the money printer, and raising interest rates is pretty much clubbing the economy with the club until submission. That whole process is going to have an immense impact on the stock market. It doesn't really matter right now how it's going to work, but essentially the elevated interest rates is going to push most of the US stocks way down, and most of the pain will be for the speculative stocks, the small caps, the ones that don't really make a lot of money now and they have a really huge upside in the future.
Explain that a little bit. Break that down a little bit.
Okay,
so why is this the case?
Okay, I'll explain. When in finance, when you evaluate a company, how would you evaluate the company? You look at their cash flows, right? How much money can I get from this company? If you're buying a business, that's the first question you ask, right? How much revenue you have every year? How much profit you have every year? And you say, okay, so how much money will this company make for the next 10 years? And you use different assumptions. Basically say, okay, how much the revenues will grow or not grow every year? How much the expenses would grow every year? And you come up to a certain number, like a cash flow, a projected cash flow for the next 10 years. But, if I tell you right now, well, Stephen, you owe me $1 million in 2035. And you tell me, well, Tom, I'm willing to pay you today in 2021. How much would you take to get rid of this debt? And then I'll probably tell you, give me 500,000 today, and you don't have to give me the $1 million in 2035. The same thing happens in the stock market. Now, that difference between the $1 million to the 500 is determined by the level of interest, because that level of interest is what's the weighted average cost of capital. And as the weighted average cost of capital will go up eventually, once they raise interest rates, it's going to push all these valuations down, because they're bringing these cash flows from year 10 all the way back to 2021 is going to become more expensive, essentially lowering every single valuation of every single company in the stock market.
Right. So prices of stocks go down. We enter perhaps
I'll give an example, a better
period.
example. The commercials for the guy who, like, I want my annuity now. I forgot his name. And there's the people singing. It's like the J.
Harry, find it. Well, Harry will find it. Yeah.
I have an annuity, but I need cash now.
He'll basically give you a lump sum today, and he'll buy your annuities off you. The amount you get now basically gets slashed massively once the interest rates goes up. The same thing with company valuations, because company valuations are essentially annuities, if you really think about it.
So I guess my question is this, Tom, to sort of wrap this up. Where do you think the U.S. is headed now that we're going to probably see rates change, them try to control inflation, which is going to kind of stop the party a little bit? What do you think is going to happen? Is this going to be recession? Not to be a Michael Burry or a Peter Schiff here, where we're calling those guys, the doomsday forecasters all the time, it's kind of never really works. So I'm not trying to forecast anything, but where do you think the general trajectory is?
By the way, shout out to Michael Burry for successfully predicting 5 out of the last 0 stock market crashes. Just kidding. I love Michael Burry, one of the best in the business. So I think it's a necessary beating the market has to take. It's honestly the only choice the Fed actually has. You have to commend, honestly, John Paul for actually doing this now. I think it's going to be painful. It's going to be unpleasant. Like any rehab, we have to go through it. And eventually we're going to come out stronger. I know there's this thing in the US. As a foreigner, I find it amusing how self-deprecating Americans are to their own country and economy. Everything is going to be fine. It's going to be unpleasant. It's going to be a little bit painful. But eventually, I would not bet against the US economy, bro. It's going to be just fine.
USA.
USA.
Just kidding. Hey, thank you so much for coming by. That way to end it off strong. Guys, if you guys want to go follow Tom Nash on YouTube.
Bear market
show. Thanks for watching, everybody.